really, there was a shift, a total shift in all of this. So it had a great deal to do with it. But I noticed, one of the things that I did notice throughout my experience was that the guitar was, it seemed that it was considered secondary to all of the other instruments in jazz. There were exceptions. There were players like Wes, and there were players like what you heard earlier, Grant Green, and Joe Pass, and Howard Robertson, and Johnny Smith, and other guitarists. But that was kept only to the guitarists. The guitarists knew who the guitarists were. But you talked to a tenor player, and the tenor players really didn't really keep up with guitar players, nor did drummers. So there was a difference in terms of the attitude toward the evaluation and critique as to what the instrument was worth. That also altered my intentions with regards to priority. I wanted to find out more about the instrument. That really led towards some major breakthroughs in the way the instrument is structured. So many things changed along those lines, and that's what we're going to really cover.
Before we go into that a little bit, I'd like you to tell everybody what it was like for you at the end of the 70s when you were at, maybe let's say, then at the top of your career. You had so much activity with some remarkable players, and you had very successful albums at that time, Joyous Lake, and had some recordings, I think, with Ron, that were very, very well received. And yet, it was right at that time that you had a very strong challenge health-wise in your life, and it made quite an impact. Can you tell everyone about that?
Sure, I could even be a little bit more specific than I was in the interview a little earlier this evening. I was born with AVM. AVM is is the abbreviation for arterial venous malformation. And what it really is an entanglement of specific nerves in the brain. And this took place on the left side of my brain. And through the years, it grew. And it eventually became the size of a pear, which had to be removed. And there was neurosurgery for that. And I remember what caused, I had seizures throughout my life, but each of these seizures was determined and diagnosed in a completely abstract way, which was a misdiagnosis. There were times when the seizure was diagnosed as bipolar problems. There were times when it was diagnosed as schizophrenia. And throughout these periods of diagnoses, the follow-up to the diagnosis was a procedure that I was to experience, such as electric shock treatment. And then, of course, all of the different medications that were prescribed to me for these off-limits misdiagnoses. In 1976, I was in the midst of a festival, a jazz festival, Riviera 76 it was called. And that particular festival took place 40 miles outside of Marseille in France.
How many people were there?
There were 240,000 at that particular concert. And Joyous Lake, my group, was on it. Return to Forever was on it. Joe Cocker was on it. Many artists were on that particular performance. And in the middle of my performance, on one of the compositions, I had a seizure. And I stopped in my playing, which was in the midst of a solo, and there are even pictures of that moment. I just was suspended there because the seizure itself was like falling into a black hole, and there was nothing to cling to. And the band was under the impression that it was just an interpretation of an improvised request on my behalf. In other words, it was a silence similar to Miles, when Miles Davis just plays something intense and provocative, and then suddenly there's a stop, and he just puts his head down and looks at his feet. And then when he's ready, he comes back and plays again, which is exactly what I did when I was able to do so. That caused me to make a decision. And when I got back to New York City at the end of that festival, at the end of that tour, I decided to disband the group. And I stopped playing for at least 6 months. And I went into a Cistercian monastery in Virginia. I decided to do that. When I was in the monastery, I received a contact from a gentleman by the name of Pat Hicks. And along with that, there was Howard Roberts. They both invited me to come out to California, to Los Angeles. And they gave me an office at GIT, which was called GIT then, Guitar Institute of Technology. And I did so. I went out there for 2 years. And it was 1979 that the final seizure took place, where they gave me 2 hours to live in California. And it was a major moment. I decided to fly back to Philadelphia because I had mom and dad. Being an only child, it was essential for them and my love for them to be able to adhere to what I felt coming from them. And I flew back into Philadelphia, come to find out that the neurosurgeon was a big fan of mine, Frederick Simeone, in fact. And I went directly from Philadelphia International Airport to Pennsylvania Hospital. And there were 2 operations. One was on Good Friday, and I went into a coma, and the second was on Easter Sunday, and I came out of it. At the same time,